This is VOA News. I'm Joe Ramsey. Sudan's warring factions agreed to a 72-hour ceasefire starting on Tuesday while Western Arab and Asian nations raced to extract their citizens from the country. The Sudan Armed Forces said the U.S. and Saudi Arabia mediated the truce. The two sides have not abided by several previous temporary truce deals. 2 days after a military evacuation of its embassy in Sudan, the U.S. has started helping private American citizens who want to leave the country. AP Washington correspondent Sagar Magani reports.
This morning, Secretary of State Antony Blinken said it's hard to know exactly how many Americans are in Sudan and how many would want to stay.
I would say some dozens have expressed an interest in leaving.
Hours later, here at the White House,
American citizens have begun arriving in Port Sudan, and we are helping to facilitate their onward travel.
National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan says there are intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance assets in the sky over the land evacuation route to provide overwatch. Sagar Magani at the White House.
Kenyan security forces continue to recover bodies of people who starved themselves to death following the teacher of a pastor. Mohammed Yusuf reports from Nairobi.
Pastor Mackenzie was arrested more than a week ago after 4 of his followers died of starvation, thinking it was a way to meet Jesus, according to reports. Kenyan President William Ruto said there was no difference between the pastor's actions and those of terrorists. President Ruto has directed security agencies to monitor the activities of religious leaders who promote dangerous ideologies. Mohammed Yusuf for VOA News, Nairobi.
Follow us on the VOA mobile app or online at voanews.com. This is VOA News. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov chaired a meeting of the United Nations Security Council on Monday, even with Russia accused of violating the UN Charter and brutally invading its neighbor. Reuters correspondent Jillian Kitchener reports.
Before Lavrov's remarks, Secretary General Antonio Guterres stated plainly that Moscow's invasion ran contrary to the United Nations mission. And the U.S. envoy, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, went further.
Our hypocritical convener today, Russia, invaded its neighbor, Ukraine, and struck at the heart of the UN Charter.
Thomas-Greenfield also accused Russia of violating international law by wrongfully detaining Americans, calling for the release of Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich and ex-Marine Paul Whelan.
Reuters correspondent Jillian Kitchener. India will overtake China as the world's most populous country in the coming week, hitting almost 1.43 billion people, the United Nations said Monday. Last week, the UN's annual State of the World Population Report had said the milestone would come by mid-year 2023. Quote, by the end of this month, India's population is expected to reach 1,425,775,850 people, matching and then surpassing the population of mainland China, the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs said. Jury selection has begun in the U.S. federal death penalty trial of a truck driver accused of shooting to death 11 Jewish worshipers at a synagogue in the city of Pittsburgh in the northeastern U.S. state of Pennsylvania in the deadliest anti-Semitic attack in American history. Robert Bowers from the Pittsburgh suburb of Baldwin faces 63 counts in the October 27, 2018 attack at the Tree of Life Synagogue, where members of 3 Jewish congregations were holding Sabbath activities. 2 big shakeups have taken place in American cable news with the departures of 2 well-known news show hosts, AP correspondent Jackie Quinn reports.
Fox News has announced it's parting ways with Tucker Carlson, whose last show was on Friday. Carlson frequently made news himself with his on-screen friendship with Donald Trump and embarrassing emails just made public in the lawsuit filed by Dominion Voting Systems. The other show host, Don Lemon, fired from CNN. Pop culture expert Professor Robert Thompson at Syracuse University says Carlson's departure is the most surprising.
One of their big money makers now being kicked to the curb. At the same time, they're having to shell out an enormous chunk of money to Dominion.
I'm Jackie Quinn.
And I'm Joe Ramsey. VOA News. This is VOA News. I'm Joe Ramsey. World powers evacuated more people from Sudan on Wednesday in complex international operations prompted by an eruption of fighting that has sent thousands of foreigners and many more Sudanese people fleeing for safety. A French ship carrying hundreds of evacuees docked Wednesday morning in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, as part of broader efforts including several warships in addition to airlifts. France played a crucial role in paving the way for mass evacuations from an airbase outside Sudan's capital, Khartoum. Taking advantage of relative calm, many Sudanese in Khartoum and the neighboring city of Omdurman emerged from their homes to seek food and water, lining up at bakeries or grocery stores after days of being trapped inside by the fighting between the army and a rival paramilitary group. Still, gunfire and explosions could be heard in the city, though residents said clashes were more limited in pockets mainly around the military's headquarters and the Republican Palace in central Khartoum and around bases in Omdurman across the Nile River. The leaders of China and Ukraine have had their first known contact since the Russian invasion more than a year ago. AP Washington correspondent Sagar Magani reports.
Volodymyr Zelensky described it as a long and meaningful call with Xi Jinping, which came a month after the Chinese leader visited Moscow.
We think that's a good thing.
National Security Council spokesman John Kirby says the U.S. has been pushing Beijing to get Kyiv's views
on this illegal and unprovoked invasion by Russia.
And while Zelensky was upbeat after the call, Russia praised it as well, saying it shows China wants to facilitate peace. Beijing says it's looking to send a mediator to Kyiv. Sagar Magani, Washington.
This is VOA News. Pope Francis has decided to give women the right to vote at an upcoming meeting of bishops. AP correspondent Charles de Ledesma reports.
The Vatican has published modifications which emphasize Pope Francis's vision for the lay faithful taking on a greater role in church affairs that have long been left to clerics, bishops and cardinals. Francis has approved changes to the norms governing the Synod of Bishops, a Vatican body that gathers the world's bishops together for periodic meetings, following years of demands by women to have the right to vote. Observers say it's an historic reform reflecting Francis's hopes to give women greater decision-making responsibilities and lay people more say in the life of the Catholic Church. I'm Charles de Ledesma.
Brazil's Congress on Wednesday opened an inquiry into the January 8th storming of key government buildings in the capital by violent demonstrators who denied the electoral victory of the recently inaugurated President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. Lula's Workers' Party had tried to avoid the congressional inquiry, hoping to leave investigations to law enforcement and keep lawmakers focused on its legislative agenda. The right-wing opposition has pushed for an inquiry to blame his new government for security failures in Brasilia that day. In an escalating battle between Walt Disney and Florida Republican Governor Ron DeSantis, Disney on Wednesday sued the potential White House contender over his state's efforts to control its Florida theme parks, Reuters correspondent Jillian Kitchener reports.
The lawsuit marks the company's response to mounting efforts by DeSantis and his supporters to exert power over Disney World, which draws millions of visitors every year to its massive amusement parks. Disney say gay! The battle began last year after Disney criticized a state law dubbed Don't Say Gay, banning classroom discussion of sexuality and gender identity in schools from kindergarten through grade 3. Disney argues it was denied its First Amendment rights to free speech.
Reuters correspondent Jillian Kitchener. The writer suing Donald Trump for allegedly raping her nearly 30 years ago told jurors at a civil trial on Wednesday that the former U.S. president sexually assaulted her and defamed her by lying about it. 79-year-old E. Jean Carroll, a former Elle magazine advice columnist, is seeking unspecified damages from the 76-year-old Trump, who leads the Republican field in the 2024 presidential campaign. She is suing over an alleged encounter in a department store dressing room in late 1995 or early 1996, where she says Trump raped her until she was able to flee. I'm Joe Ramsey. VOA.
This is VOA News. I'm Marissa Melton. A Russian missile strike on the southern Ukrainian city of Mykolaiv Thursday killed at least one person and injured 23 others. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said on the Telegram app that Russia launched the attack with 4 Caliber missiles launched from the Black Sea. The strike damaged homes and an apartment building. Russia denies targeting civilians, saying it attacks military targets. In a village near the Ukrainian city of Kharkiv, a crowd squeezes into the village hall to see Dr. Oleg Marchenko. His mobile clinic is a lifeline for villages formerly occupied by Russia, where hospitals and clinics are few and far between. Reuters' Lucy Fielder has this story.
Dr. Oleg Marchenko's mobile clinic is a lifeline for Ukrainians who stayed in eastern villages when the Russians came. This week, he and his team of volunteers saw dozens of patients in the once occupied village of Vishneva, not far from Kharkiv. Russian strikes destroyed a large number of hospitals and clinics, and many people have no local doctor. High blood pressure is common. Some were too old or sick to leave during the occupation. The health of others who stayed is deteriorating. Ukraine's health ministry said Russia destroyed 174 medical facilities and significantly damaged more than 1,100 others.
Reuters' Lucy Fielder reporting. The United Nations Security Council demanded unanimously Thursday that Afghanistan's Taliban leadership swiftly reverse their restrictions on women's access to education and work, and condemned a recent ban on local female staff working for the United Nations. More than 90 countries co-sponsored the measure. The Security Council expressed deep concern at the increasing erosion, it said, of respect for the human rights and freedoms of women and girls. VOA News. Former U.S. President Donald Trump said Thursday if he wins the 2024 presidential election, he will order the Justice Department to investigate what he called radical county and state prosecutors whom he accused without evidence of targeting conservatives. Trump himself faces at least 4 criminal investigations. He's denied wrongdoing in all of them and called the investigations politically motivated. E. Jean Carroll, a writer accusing Trump of raping her in the mid-1990s, pushed back during a cross-examination on Thursday. More from Reuters' Gillian Kitchener.
E. Jean Carroll, the writer accusing Donald Trump of rape, pushed back during cross-examination Thursday, raised her voice and said, quote, "I'm telling you, he raped me whether I screamed or not." On her second day of testimony, Carroll on Thursday forcefully denied that she came forward with her story more than 2 decades later so she could sell more copies of her 2019 memoir titled, "What Do We Need Men For?" Carroll said she witnessed women going public in 2017 with sexual assault allegations against former Hollywood producer Harvey Weinstein. It was then she realized she couldn't stay silent about Trump. Trump has consistently denied Carroll's allegations. He has not attended the trial and is not required to be there.
As Reuters' Gillian Kitchener reporting, Burkina Faso's military-run government on Thursday broke its silence over a massacre carried out by men in army uniform, issuing a statement condemning barbaric acts and urging a full investigation. A local prosecutor said armed men dressed in the fatigues of the country's armed forces slaughtered inhabitants of the village of Karma in the jihadist-hit north on April 20th, killing around 60 people. A statement issued by the communications minister expressed concern over reports of killings in what it called unclear circumstances. The white woman who was at the center of the lynching of Emmett Till in the United States in 1955 has died in hospice care. AP correspondent Jackie Quinn.
88-year-old Carolyn Bryant Donham has died. In the summer of 1955 in Mississippi, she accused 14-year-old Emmett Till of making improper advances toward her at a grocery store. One witness said the black teen whistled at the 21-year-old Donham, which violated social codes at that time. Till was brutalized and killed, his body dumped into a river, and post-mortem photos were published that shocked the nation. Donham's husband at the time and a relative were acquitted by a jury, but did later confess to killing the teen.
From Washington, I'm Marissa Melton, VOA News. This is VOA News. I'm Marissa Melton. Several hundred American citizens have already departed Sudan, either by land, sea, or air. This according to State Department Deputy Spokesperson Vedant Patel on Friday, as fighting between the army and a rival paramilitary force has rocked the country. Fewer than 5,000 people have requested additional information from the State Department, and only a fraction of those are Americans who have actively sought Washington's assistance to leave the country. The Pentagon later said only a relatively small number of Americans are seeking to leave Sudan at the moment, and international flights are still departing. In spite of an extended ceasefire, the International Committee of the Red Cross is warning the humanitarian crisis in Sudan will only go from bad to worse if those needing aid can't be reached. VOA's Jeff Custer reports.
International Committee of the Red Cross Emergency Director for East Africa, Saraf Shashwat, told the Associated Press Friday thousands of people are still in Khartoum in the middle of an active war zone. He said the international community needs to put pressure on the combatants to honor any ceasefire agreed to ensure the safety for aid workers trying to reach those people.
What worries me is that there are thousands, and we estimate about close to 50,000 children who were being treated for malnutrition, who don't have access to that treatment because they have had to move, because there is a disruption in supply line. And what worries me is that their situation will further deteriorate.
Jeff Custer, VOA News, Washington.
Pope Francis warned Friday of the dangers of rising nationalism in Europe. He was making a speech in Hungary. He told the Budapest government that accepting migrants would be a true sign of Christianity. You can find more on this story at our website, voanews.com. This is VOA News. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky used his evening address Friday to send condolences to the family of a mother and daughter killed in Russian strikes in Dnipro. He said as a result of today's missile strike in the Dnipropetrovsk region, 2 Ukrainians died, a mother and her daughter, Olha, born in 1992, and Veronica, born in 2020. She hadn't lived old enough to be 3. Russia hurled missiles at cities across Ukraine as people slept Friday, killing at least 25 civilians in the first large-scale airstrikes in nearly 2 months, as Kyiv said it was nearly ready to launch a huge assault to retake occupied land. Officials said at least 23 civilians were killed, including 4 children, with an estimated 109 people living in the part of the block that was hit and 27 flats completely destroyed. Colorado's governor has signed 4 gun control bills. AP correspondent Norman Hall.
Rising suicides and youth violence and preventing mass shootings. They were enacted just 5 months after a mass shooting at an LGBTQ club in Colorado Springs. The measures raised the buying age for any gun from 18 to 21, established a 3-day waiting period between the purchase and receipt of a gun, strengthened the state's red flag law, and roll back some legal protections for the firearm industry. Gun rights groups said immediately they will file legal challenges. I'm Norman Hall.
Canada and the United States have agreed to trace guns that are intercepted at the border, according to officials from both countries on Friday. Canada's public safety minister and the U.S. Secretary of Homeland Security announced 4 agreements between both countries aimed at addressing cross-border crime, including one featuring increased tracing of firearms. Last year, over 1,000 firearms were seized at the border. This, according to a government source not authorized to speak on the record. That's broadly in line with 2021, when 1,110 were confiscated. And Brazil's President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva officially recognized 6 indigenous reservations on Friday, reversing the policies of his far-right predecessor, Jair Bolsonaro, who opened the land to farming and other industries. Lula signed the official decrees in the capital, Brasilia, on the final day of a 5-day gathering of indigenous people from around the country. The act fulfills a campaign promise he made to stop the deforestation of the land that occurred under Bolsonaro. The scientific journal Nature reports that under Bolsonaro, 129% deforestation inside the Amazon increased 129%. Marissa Melton, VOA News.